Hey guys, my name's Alicia, and if you didn't know, I sell secondhand clothing on the apps Depop and Poshmark, and today we're going to be talking all about taxes. So a pretty boring topic today, but one that is pretty necessary. And yes, it is that time of year again, tax season. This year taxes are due on May 2nd, so I thought I'd get in about a month ahead to show you guys how to prepare your taxes for your reselling business. So because I live in Canada, specifically Ontario, this video is going to be all about how to file your taxes specifically for Canadians. And I did just want to put a disclaimer that I am not a financial advisor by any means. This is not like financial advice. This is simply what I do to prepare for tax season, so I just thought I would share with everybody. And I also just wanted to say this is actually going to be a little bit more about accounting, not how to actually like go and file your taxes yourself, because personally I just pay somebody to do that for me. It's a once a year kind of payment, and I think it is extremely valuable and worth it to let a professional handle filing your taxes. So with that being said, I'm going to show you guys everything that you need to prepare in order to file your taxes. Now, a question I get quite often is people asking me if they should be filing their taxes for their Depop and Poshmark income. So yes, like according to the law, you should be reporting all of your income to the government. That includes the money you make from Depop and Poshmark. But if you are actually running your Depop and Poshmark as a business instead of just, selling your old clothes, you definitely should be actually registering your business in order to properly file your taxes. So registering your business is actually pretty simple, at least in Ontario, because that's where I live, that's what I can speak upon, but I'm sure it's very, very similar from province to province. But registering your business is essentially where you're going to be choosing your business name, stating what kind of business activity you're going to be doing, and essentially making your business legit and getting a master business license. Now, I'm not going to go through a whole walkthrough of this, but I will link a really good tutorial video in the description that will show you exactly how to sign up for one. But just a few things off the top of my head that you will need to know is that you want to register your business as a sole proprietor. That basically just means that you're just you as a person. Your entity is kind of like your business. You're not in a partnership. It's not incorporated or anything like that. So for me personally, when I signed up, I selected sole proprietor. And then secondly, it does cost $60 to register, so just be prepared for that as well. So now that you've registered your business, we're all good to move on and talk about what documents you're going to need to file your taxes. So one of the main things that you are going to need to report is obviously your income, so how much money you are making. So in order to keep track of all of my sales, I've basically created this spreadsheet where I can keep track of every single item I've sold, how much money I've made off of it, and then all of the expenses that come along with each sale. Now, I actually have a whole video where I go a little bit more into depth on how I fill this sheet out. So if you wanted to learn all about that, I'll leave that video linked in the cards and down below. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to quickly go over what this looks like. And a lot of this information is more just for personal things that I like to keep track of and not necessarily stuff that's totally important for your taxes. So first off, I like to include the platform that it's sold on just for personal reference, the item number just to keep track of how many sales I'm making in a year, the name of the item, of course, just to keep track of what I'm selling, quantity, the customer, the tracking number, just so I have a place to reference it if I need to, the date sold, which I think is pretty important to keep track of. Then I do the date shipped, the type of mail and weight. And then here is where it gets really important. This is where we actually have our numbers. So I have the unit price, which is basically what the item sold for, and the shipping price, which is how much I charged for shipping. So these two columns are actually really important because this is how we're going to be able to calculate our gross income for the year. Gross being all the money we made before we subtract our expenses. So if I go ahead and highlight those two columns and then click on the sum button, it will automatically add everything up and give me my total income for the year. Now, this spreadsheet, including every other spreadsheet I show you in this video, is going to be linked below. So if you like it, definitely check it out, download it, and then you can use it for your own purposes. So not only is this a great way to just get a quick overview of everything I sold, what I technically made off of each item, this is where I go to at the end of the year to calculate my income. And the easiest method to keep up with these spreadsheets for me is basically to update them every time I ship. Because when I'm shipping, I'm already pulling up like most of this information that needs to go go into my spreadsheets. So it's easy to just kind of quickly fill in the information as I go. Now you could just wait till the end of the month to do this, or possibly the end of the year, but that is going to be a ton of work. So I'd highly recommend keeping up with all your spreadsheets every single time you ship. That's personally what has worked for me. So now that we've got a place to keep track of all of our income, we also need to keep track of our expenses. So your expenses are basically anything that you are purchasing that is necessary in order to keep your business running. So as a reseller, some of the obvious ones are shipping, for example, Depop and Poshmark fees, packaging supplies. These are all things that you have to spend money on in order to run your business. And these expenses are technically tax write-offs. Now, contrary to maybe what a lot of people believe, tax write-offs aren't like things that you just get to buy for your business for free. All it means, it's basically going to lower your taxes at the end of the year. So for example, if you made an income of $1,000 in the year, but you also spent $500 on expenses that you're able to write off, then you're only going to be taxed for the amount that is left, so $500. So like I said, these aren't items that you're getting for free somehow, but the more things that you are able to write off, the more money you're going to save at the end of the year when you do your taxes. Now, in order to claim these expenses, you have to keep records of everything. So you need to be keeping all of your receipts. So all of your receipts for your shipping, for your office supplies you're buying, pretty much anything you're buying, hang on to the receipt. I personally use one of these file folders with 12 different slots just to organize them by month. I just find that easier to keep track of. And this file folder is going to contain all of my receipts for the entire year. And the reason why it's so important to be keeping these receipts is because you can actually be audited for up to, I believe, 7 years prior, meaning that at any time the government can kind of send somebody over to kind of like look into your business and cross-reference everything and make sure, you know, everything's adding up and that you're essentially filing your taxes properly and not committing tax fraud, I guess. So that's why it's so important to be organized and keep everything. So for example, this file folder is in fact an expense because I needed to buy it for my business. So obviously, not only do you have to keep those receipts, you do have to keep, you know, a spreadsheet so that you can keep track of how much you're spending in the year, which is essentially what is called an expense report. So the one I've been using recently is actually just a Google Drive template, but I really like it because it keeps everything organized, really easy to use, but also gives you a little visual graph of how much you're spending versus making. So it actually has 2 pages to it. The first page is kind of just an overview of everything, and then the second page is where you can actually go in and individually keep track of all those transactions. So on the left here, you can see there's a spot for your expenses. You can fill in the date, the amount, the description, and then the category. It is really important to be separating these things by category because certain categories are eligible for a bigger percentage of a write-off than others. For example, food and entertainment, you can only claim up to 50% of that. So keeping all these categories separate is gonna help making filing your taxes a lot easier. So for example, I just have a little Value Village receipt right here of some clothing I purchased for my inventory. So I'm basically gonna look at the receipt, punch in the date, punch in the total amount that I spent. For description, I would just put clothing, and then for category, I would go ahead and put inventory. And then once this receipt is logged, I'm just gonna put it away in my file folder for safekeeping. So that is essentially what you wanna do for every single transaction. It is very tedious, but the more organized you are, just the more easier it is going to be to keep track of everything. And then in this spreadsheet, you can see too on the right here how there is a section for income. So remember earlier when I grabbed the total from my sales spreadsheet, this is where I would input that total to give my gross income. So now if we go back to that summary page, you can see that it takes your expenses and subtracts it from your income in order to give you kind of like your net income. And it gives just a clean overview of all the amounts that you've spent on each category specifically. So everything's just in one nice organized place. And here I'm just gonna give you guys a quick look at the kinds of things that I have as expenses that are more specific to reselling. So we've got inventory, shipping, advertising fees, so that would be like your Depop and Poshmark fee, office supplies, shipping materials, consignment, because sometimes I do a consignment, I charge a fee for that, food, parking, subscriptions. So for example, if you use like a cross-listing platform or some sort of like bot that makes it easier for you to list, phone bill, yes, you can write off your phone bill because it is essential for your business, and your accounting fees. So when the time comes that you do have to pay somebody to file your taxes, you can actually write it off, which is pretty cool. So that is just to name a few. I would encourage you guys to kind of go ahead and do your own research of what is and is not allowed to be expensed. You're also allowed to expense certain things like parts of your home or your vehicle. I did want to mention too that it is best practice to be keeping your vehicle expenses separate from all your other expenses just because of the way things are calculated. So I'm also going to include this vehicle expense report, which as you can see, really similar to the regular expense report. You got the date, category, description, and amount. That way all your vehicle expenses are just kept in one area. Same thing with home expenses. I would keep a separate expense report for that as well. And speaking of vehicles, if you are using a car for your business, it is required that you keep a driving log. So this is kind of like the third spreadsheet that is pretty essential to keep track of. So yeah, it is required by the Canadian Revenue Agency that you keep an accurate driving log. So this is essentially keeping track of the kilometers that you're using for your business versus for your personal use. And this is really important because this is going to be how they determine what percentage of your vehicle is actually used for your business. And therefore, if you go to also expense like your actual vehicle payments or things like that, they know what percentage to write off. So yeah, every time I go to the thrift store, every time I go to the post office to ship, I log that in my driving log and keep track of how many kilometers I'm driving for my business. It is another one of those things that is pretty tedious and that I like to keep up with pretty often because, you know, it can be easy to forget, like thinking of all the places you've driven in the past week. But one thing that I found super helpful is actually the Google Maps timeline. This is essentially when you turn on your location and Google basically keeps track of like everywhere you go. Now I understand some people might not be cool with that because yeah, Google is tracking like my every move, but I personally love it and I find it super useful because yeah, I tend to forget, you know, where I drove that day. So I can just pull this up onto my computer and it tells me exactly where I went, at what time, and how many kilometers I drove. But there are like many other tools that are specifically designed for this that I'm sure you can research and look into. So I think that's pretty much everything for this video. So hopefully that was helpful. I know when you're doing this for the first time, it is like so overwhelming, so confusing. And if you have any questions, just feel free to leave them down below. I'll try my best to answer them as best as I can. My Depop Poshmark and Instagram will all be linked below if you want to check it out. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next video.